So just to say again to everyone, I am now recording. So if you do not want to be on the screen, please feel free to turn off your screen. We're going to record this so that for individuals who can't attend, they can view this at a later date. Hi, my name is Elizabeth Macaulay. I'm the Executive Officer of the MA Program in Liberal Studies. Tonight I'm joined by Michael Greer and Talya Wolf, our two advising fellows. Michael is in her 7th year in philosophy, and Talya is in her 7th year in sociology. They both have great perspectives on this evening, both as individuals who have done master's degrees and then gone on to doctoral studies. Talya was in the MALS program as well. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share my screen in the PowerPoint. Hang on one sec. Okay, let me do this. Hold on one sec. And then hang on, let me just do this. Dismissal. Let me just go here. Hang on, let me just, I'm sorry, let me just do one thing here. Let me do this. Hold on. Sorry, I feel like I'm having like mid-semester. It's only the first part of the semester and I can have brain freeze already. It's wonderful. Slideshow, click from start. Okay, there you guys go. Hang on one sec. Let me just now share my screen. And here you go. There we go. How is that? Can you guys all see my slide? Perfect. Okay, great. Hang on one second. Let me just do one thing here. Nope, and I stopped sharing. All right, I'm having one of those days. Okay, sorry about this. Sometimes you have a moment. All right, so there we go. You guys can all see this now. Perfect. Okay, so let's get started. Apologies for that. Just a little chaos on my end here. So this is basically a panel that's going to kind of do a PhD applications must-knows. This is kind of tips and tricks, just getting an overview of what applying for a PhD looks like, orienting you to the process, some things that are important to know. And so what we want to do with that today is really start with this most fundamental question, which whether or not.
Hello, I think the screen is not being shared properly.
Okay.
This side is supposed to be facing the presenter.
Oh, then I'm sorry. Thank you. Hang on one sec. Let me see what I've done. Sorry, I'm having, let's try this. Is that better? Can you see it now?
Yes,
Sorry.
this is perfect.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I thought it was doing it correctly, but I'm having one of those days. Thank you. Okay. So what we want to do is say, is a PhD right for you? If so, kind of what field? And then the nuts and bolts of applying and applications, deadlines, personal statements, writing samples, and letters of recommendation, and some food for thought. Okay, so really the first question one should ask is, is a PhD right for me? Because I think what happens, a lot of people who are interested in PhDs love learning, they love being a student, they love being in a very rich academic and intellectual environment. They really may love what they're doing, is kind of one thing that attracts you, have a good network. And you can't in a way imagine doing something else than what you are doing. And that you are very comfortable with uncertainty. The one thing I would say that is certain about higher education is tremendous uncertainty. And the number of tenure track jobs are reducing in numbers due to declining numbers of younger people in the United States, abroad, other things like that. So it's just really a fundamental question, which is a PhD the right thing? And then why are you doing it? Connected to that is you really should think about what field you're going to choose and what field you want to be in. And so with this, I'm going to let the advising fellows talk a little bit about their experiences in different disciplines and how they ended up in the departments that they are in and how they approach this question of field. So Michael and Talya, take it away. Do you want to go first, Talya?
Sure, I can kick it off. So I actually have like I don't know if it's interesting, but my background, my undergraduate work was in chemistry, and I was very good at chemistry, and people sort of like kept ushering me along in chemistry. And I ended up enrolling in a doctoral program in chemistry right out of undergrad. I am now in my 7th year in sociology. So you can tell that that did not work out, but I think I was sort of ushered along that path and I was good at it and I didn't stop to wonder if that was something I wanted to do. And then I found sociology during my master's and recognized it as a research interest of mine. I spent a lot of time working as a nanny and became interested in the sociology of class and childcare. And so I had a very clear, whereas with chemistry, I was like, oh, I am good at this thing, and so I will keep doing it. Whereas with sociology, it was like, oh, I have actually this question that I'm really curious about, and I want to better understand it and research it and try to make sense of it. And so I think just having like a really clear understanding of why that discipline is the right fit for you, and why you want to be there was helpful for me. But Michael had a different experience, so I'll pass it over now.
Yeah, so I think I did my undergrad in English and philosophy, and then I wanted to do a PhD, and then my undergrad advisor in the UK said that I should do a master's degree before I went on to do a PhD. So I did a master's degree in the UK, and then I applied for PhDs kind of by myself. I didn't get a lot of support when I was applying for PhDs. I wasn't affiliated with the university. I was just working as a substitute teacher in New Orleans and just like trying. And so I decided that the kind of research I wanted to do could be done in different disciplines. So I knew I wanted to work on like feminist philosophy, on embodiment, on allyship, on in-fat studies. And I knew that work could be done in women and gender studies departments, philosophy, and even a comp lit department. And the way I found out what departments would be amenable to my research was by doing research on the departments and by looking at scholars I really admire in the field. So I was like, what am I reading? What am I interested in? What kind of work am I interested in producing? And then I was like, where are these people based? And then further to that, I was like, where did these people get their PhDs? Right? What was their PhD in, 20 years ago? And where were they supported when they were doing their PhDs? Or what was their PhD in 10 years ago? So like one of the places I applied, University of South Florida, Tampa, like not many people have heard of that, like I guess in the UK, for instance, but a lot of philosophers I liked a lot had done their PhDs there. So that's why I applied there. Or Michigan State University, there were a lot of people there who I really admired and wanted to meet and work with. Yeah, and then in the end, I kind of, we can talk about this more later, but I ended up writing 3 different writing samples for the different disciplines, and I wouldn't recommend tailoring your application so much that you're putting your energy into 3 entirely different writing samples. I would recommend just doing 1 writing sample, even if you're applying to different disciplines. But I did tailor all my applications like very much to the department I was applying to and the discipline I was applying to, and based on like what kind of work I knew was being done by the people there.
I think that's both a very good summary. The other thing I would say is my PhD is in classical archaeology, which I did in the UK, but most people in the United States either end up in very specific types of programs. They're usually either in classics departments or in art history departments. So there's also a question of like, what do you want to teach? Do you want to teach Greek and Latin, or do you want to teach art history surveys? And so this is one of those things where knowing kind of how the discipline functions and what it prioritizes is really important. And, to this point of an interdisciplinary doctoral program is not necessarily going to help your cause and make you more likely to get a job, because academia is still very discipline specific. That has not changed in a very long time. There may be the emergence of new disciplines, but it is a discipline with its own language. So interdisciplinary doctoral programs are not usually likely to increase your likelihood of being hired or your job prospects. So
can I just add one thing on that note, Lizzie?
Sure.
So in the end, I got accepted to both women and gender studies and philosophy departments, and I chose philosophy for exactly that reason. Where as a philosophy PhD student, I can apply to jobs at both women and gender studies and philosophy programs. But if I had done my PhD in women and gender studies, philosophy departments don't want someone who has a PhD in that. So I chose philosophy as a discipline. It's not interdisciplinary usually, because it would like make my job chances higher.
Yeah. And I think that's one of those things that you have to kind of think about here. And just going back to this point, sorry, I've gone to the slide about two fields, like you do actually then have to do a lot of work and research because you will be making different cases to why you should be in one field versus another field. So it's just something to think about. And so all of this really comes down to a key point in terms of basic points before you go to apply, which is research. You really need to spend the time researching the programs that you are interested in or that you think could be good for you, drawing up a long list and a short list. And this is really important. I was telling Michael and Talya, they laughed at me. I said I went to visit one school and the person I would have worked with got stuck in her closet and was late for the appointment. But she had a walk-in closet, which she was happy to tell me about, which I was like, fantastic. I feel like this may be, if I come here, all about you. And that's lovely, but that's not what I want to do for the most of my 20s. So hey, thank you. Thank you. It's been so nice to meet you. I need to go home. So I say that with humor, but like that did actually happen when I was doing kind of my visits. And so what we would say is like set up visits and calls with faculty with whom you want to work. And get a sense of the different places, get a sense if the faculty are taking students. Assistant professors may not be able to take too many students, and we can talk about how you find the sweet spot for people you might want to work with. Very senior faculty who are about to retire also may not take students. But it's worth really doing that work and being open-minded. I think what Michael said that was really profound is that like your parents may have heard of certain schools, they may not have heard of other schools. And they'd be like, but why don't you go to the school that we know the name of? And you're like, well, actually, for what I do, school Y is much better than school you've heard of. So it's just something to be aware of. The other thing to say is we're going to come to the personal statement. Like you need to take the GRE. You may not like the GRE, but it is here and it is not going anywhere for the moment. Some people are getting rid of it. Some people are keeping it. If you want to have the widest range of schools to apply to, you should have it. It just is what it is. So with that, I think we should talk a little bit about the, sorry, I'm going to click the personal statement. This is a really critical piece of writing. Because what it is trying to do is explain your research interests, your questions, and methodology. Very simply put, no one wants to hear it like you've always loved history. You've always been such a fan of history. I'm sorry, I'm an archaeologist. Like you've always loved literature. You've always wanted to be a philosopher. That's wonderful that you have a nice origin story. That's not super interesting, not to be harsh. You need to have research interest, questions, and methodology. You do not need to know what you're writing your dissertation on. And even if you do, it'll probably change. But you have to start to think about what questions you want to ask, how you might frame those questions, and where are there gaps in your field. I would recommend very strongly to be concise, no more than 1,000 words. Sometimes now there may be character limits, but you have to do this in basically like 2 pages, maybe 3 if you're lucky. And you want to be very specific. You need to talk about why you're applying to a school. For example, in Michael's case, if there's nobody who does feminist philosophy in a school, then you applying to do that, it's just not a fit. You're not going to get accepted because they don't have somebody who can supervise that. Even if it's like you're the best candidate they've seen all year, that's not a good fit. And a lot of things are about fit at a doctoral level. It's fit between you and a possible advisor, fit between you and the department, and vice versa. Because people want to know that they can, I think, that you're open to being exposed to the ideas and ways of thinking that the department is going to offer too. So you need to be very specific and you need to tailor each personal statement to each school. And that is worth all the time to do that, which means you might have a paragraph that swaps in and out, but it's really important. If you have somebody who can, faculty member who can review it with enough time, you can do that, or you can visit the writing center, which also definitely helps with this. And the last thing, which is super boring, check for grammar and typos, because people notice those things. And if they're in a grumpy mood, you don't want somebody to be grumpy because there's like a typo. But here, let me get, I don't know if you guys want to talk about the writing samples a little bit more and the importance then of the writing sample. So you have a personal statement that you write, and then you have to submit writing samples.
Yeah, just thinking about like the PhD applications from the perspective of the committee, like usually you'll be applying someplace that's giving out funding, right, for like 5 years. And so that's like $25,000, maybe $30,000 they're going to give you for 5 years, which is a lot of money. So the person, you're basically trying to convince them that like you're worth the money for 5 years. So you don't want to sell yourself as having only one project or one interest, right? You want to show that like you are really, really smart, that you like are open to learning about a bunch of different things, and the faculty that you're going to school for, that they have like 5 or 6 faculty who could work with you. Because sometimes faculty don't have any space to take you on. And so you want to show that you're like flexible, that you're like ready to be molded, and that they have something to give you, and that they should literally invest money in you. And then the writing sample thing, yeah, I would say like just choose one piece of solid work, make sure that it's really good, ask a professor in the field what they think of it as a writing sample. Having seen the PhD application, the PhD admission process in my department, usually the writing sample is what like they'll look at towards the end. So that like my department gets 400 applications for 10 spots. And then the first round, they like go through the personal statement, and anyone who like isn't a good fit or like is obviously like not ready for PhD work will get cut. So that's 200 people from the beginning. Then they have it to 200, and they look at the letters of recommendation, and they cut it down to 50. And then they're looking through the writing samples and like actually reading all the pages. But they don't get to the writing samples till kind of like the last stage of the PhD admissions. So it has to be good, but like you have to make sure that like all the other parts are really, really polished too. I don't know, Talya, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I'm actually curious, Elizabeth, what you'll say about this. My writing sample came from my Mal's thesis. And so it was sociological. It was an ethnographic study of community building in Alcoholics Anonymous. But I was going in planning on doing class in childcare and work on childcare specifically. So I wanted to continue doing ethnography. So there was overlap in the methodologies. And so I made it clear that that was something I knew how to do and how to write about. But I don't think I think it being good is more important than it being exactly linked to research you might want to do in the future, because you are going to grow as a scholar, and you're going to have different ideas. And I think with the writing sample, you want to show that you understand how to communicate clearly and as an academic. So that's my 2 cents.
I would agree with that analysis and presentation. I'm now like very far removed from this process. But for my field, you could submit 2 pieces of writing, and I was applying to certain art history and architectural history PhD programs. So one paper I presented was very art historical, even though what I wanted to do was more archaeology. And then I did one which was like more like a historiography of archaeology, of the thing I wanted to study in particular. So they could see that like, oh, she can look at sculpture and do a formal analysis and then do that, but she can also do all these other things. And so it was showing that I knew how to be conversant in the discipline of the field, and that I would be able to do that. And that I was committed to doing it. I also spent time, I had submitted those 2 essays as part of my master's degree. And so I revised them. So I took the time to really polish them, and I spent a lot of time doing that. And I think that was time well spent. So I really think like talking to your faculty members to say, what is your strongest piece of work that shows either your ability to engage with the methodologies, frameworks, or approaches in your field, as well as other things along those lines, I think is really, really good. So it's also helpful to have multiple pairs of eyes as well. So the first thing also, if you haven't picked this up already, is start now. If you're trying to apply in December or January for admission next fall to a doctoral program, you need to be thinking about all of these questions now, because it is really like another class to apply for a PhD. It just takes a lot of time. And even if you're not applying to a lot of schools, and we can talk about the sweet spot number of schools, which can be very, very varied. But even if you're applying to a smaller number of schools, it's still a lot of work. And so you have to budget for that time. And connected to that is when you go to ask for letters of recommendation, you need to think about this. So I would say there's one student who has
Can
asked.
I chime in on the writing sample?
Oh,
real
please.
quick?
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, not-
So one thing to keep in mind is that it is great to use work you've already done. You don't need to start from scratch. Be very mindful of, and we'll talk more about this, I think, but mindful of what they're asking for. Do not submit your whole thesis. They don't want a 60-page writing sample. And with that in mind, think about the best part of the work that you've done. Like, I can tell you, the conclusion to my master's thesis was pretty weak. And because I wrote it towards the end and I was scrambling and whatever, and then I had other pieces of it that were really strong. And that's what I used as my writing sample. So you want to look at the work you've done and then choose a piece of it and really polish that up, and make the quality strong. And it's not about, don't submit 60 pages because no one will read 60 pages. So that should actually be sort of like a relief that you can sort of focus in and make one thing really good.
I think that's an excellent way to say it. The essays for where I went to graduate school could be no more than 5,000 words. That's basically 17 to 20 pages. And you were allowed to submit for where I applied one writing sample and an optional additional one. So I did both, but do what they say. That's a critical thing. Part of graduate school is following instructions. In that sense, it is not different from kindergarten. If they ask you for certain things, do the things that they have asked you to do. Because Talya is right. People will not read stuff if somebody applying who submits a piece that's much too long, people just won't read it. And it's not because they don't want to, they don't have time, but also you didn't do what they were asking you to do. Okay, so moving to the next one, we should talk about references. So if you are wanting to apply in this cycle, you should be reaching out to people now. And this goes back to this point of like the networks. You need to spend time getting to know your faculty. It's not like undergrad. You need to spend the time of having conversations, engaging, because you're going to need like 3 letters of recommendation. And they need to be 3 letters of recommendation from either your undergrad or your master's degree, some combination thereof. And these are people who know you, who've taught you, and who are doing work that's related to the field. Thesis or capstone advisors are really good people for this because they see your ability to work on a larger scale project and to possibly ask interesting research questions. So I think Michael had a few thoughts on how you might identify certain faculty members, or the importance of, we were talking about this the other day, the importance of people who have standing in your field.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends where you are in your master's degree, and like whether you're trying to apply this cycle or next cycle. If you're trying to apply this cycle, I wouldn't try to make any new connections for letters now. But if you're trying to apply for next cycle, then start thinking about which professors you want to work with at the GC and which ones you'd like to write you letters that would look good on your application. So, Michelle Fine is really big in the field. Would you want her in her field? Would you want a letter from her potentially for a PhD application, right? If so, you're gonna have to take a class with her and get to know her a little bit. Yeah, and there's like a lot of very big names at the GC, and it's a really great opportunity to get to know big names. If you're applying this cycle, then making sure that the letters you get are from professors, full professors, or associate professors, not someone who's just adjuncting or just the very beginning of their career necessarily. Also, just make sure that the professor has told you they will give you a good letter of recommendation. You don't want someone, because it's anonymous. And I've heard of cases where professors write like not flattering things, and then someone doesn't get into a PhD program. And the student doesn't realize that the professor is writing not flattering things in their letters. So you need to make sure that you trust the person who's writing your letter, because you don't want them to sabotage you.
Well, and I think to that point, it's not always a point of sabotaging. American professors tend to be like, oh yes, of course I'll write something, even if they don't want to, and they won't write something. I was in the British system where they're like, we will be brutally honest about your failings or positivities. It's a little harsh, but what I learned from that was, when I agree to write a letter of recommendation, I will always say to the student, A, you have to waive your right because I want to be able to be honest, but B, I will be honest. And so, for example, if there's a student who I think I cannot write a strong letter of recommendation, I will try and be honest and say, like, I don't think I can write you the best letter of recommendation. If you still want one, I will be honest in my letter. Or I would recommend that you find someone else to write it. And that's not I don't want to do a disservice to the student, but also the people who are writing the letters have to maintain their integrity and their reputation in the field too. So if they're saying like, this is, I can say, this is a great student, they will fit really in, this is really good. Or I could say, well, this is a student with a lot of potential, but an inability to do certain things well. And I will be honest, the faculty will be honest too. So you want to think about that. So if there was a class where you really struggled and you came through in the end, that could be a great narrative. But if you had a class where, you didn't really show up that much and something else was going on in your life, then that's probably not a good person to write you a letter. And the letters make a difference because most people in graduate school, due to grade inflation and the way the United States educational system works, get A's. And so the letters and the writing samples are a way to distinguish other things where you don't have necessarily the ability to distinguish certain things from a transcript. So they're very important in that sense. Now, 2 things at the bottom. Remind once somebody says they have agreed, send them all the stuff with enough time to let them write. So it takes me usually a day to write a good letter. Because if I'm going to agree to write someone's letter, I want to do a good job. And it takes me time to formulate what I want to say. So you need to give people enough time. And they need all of your materials in order to construct what they're going to say. So that requires you to be organized in advance. You should always remind them of deadlines because they are human beings and they forget things or they get busy. And you should always waive your right to see the letter. Always, always, always. That is advice that everyone should have. But yes, please. So I will say, someone has asked me to write already this year. I've already said yes, but I said like my kid's getting her wisdom teeth out right around Christmas. I'm not going to be able to write a letter. So if somebody says like the week before Christmas, can you write a letter? I'm going to be like, I'm really sorry, I can't. Not because I wouldn't want to, but because I don't have the time and I can't do it. So ask everybody in advance because people will really want to write and they want to support students, but we are not AI chatbots yet. All right. So the other
I wanted to add one more thing. When you're thinking about who you're choosing to ask, I think it is important to think about like people's sort of standing in their field. But if you have worked really closely with somebody who you think can really speak to who you are as a student and scholar, even if they're new in their field, I think it is important to have that narrative, and then you balance it by also finding someone who's a full professor or associate professor who has a little bit more publication experience. So it's not like a hard and fast rule of don't ask somebody who's a new assistant professor, because if you have a great relationship with them and they can say things about you that others can't, that is important to get through. And then just think about, you have multiple references, so balance that. So that you're getting sort of like your whole story across.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. That's a great way to say it too. Okay, so related to this, thank everybody for writing a letter because they are labor intensive. And also then please let us know what happens. Like you don't want to hear, like, you just don't want somebody to go radio silent. The other thing is, if you got admitted, so first of all, tell everybody whether it's good news or bad news, people always want to know. And we're thrilled when it works out and we're sad for you when it doesn't work out. But the other thing is also when someone's admitted, like stay in touch because you want to develop relationships with people who were your students and maintain those relationships. So many of us have relationships with people who were our professors at different points in our academic careers. And so it's important to view this as not like the end of a relationship, but more as a continuing expansion of your network and of your relationship. The other thing to say is if you don't get in or you go like at the end of the day, no, I don't want to do this, just let them know too. Because students do want to kind of know the faculty, do want to know where you're going to end up and go. So it's important to do that. All right. Move to our next slide. Deadlines. There are no extensions. That's just the only way to say it. You need to get everything in on time. Because look, there are so many people who are applying. Let's take Michael's example of 400 people applying to philosophy. They can't have I need an extra day. I need this. I need that. Like you can't, because then everyone has an extension and it doesn't work, because actually everyone is on a pretty strict timeline to be able to meet, go through the applications, make offers. So deadlines are deadlines. So you have to understand. And so you need to track the deadlines of the different schools you're applying to, because they may range from December 1 to January 15th. So that's just important. I recommend a spreadsheet. It's a helpful way to do it. Spreadsheets are great. Talya is the queen of spreadsheets. But really it's a good way, like your schools, your recommendations, like what you're doing, so that you can track everything. It really does involve a lot of moving parts, and just make sure you have everything. Always never save anything to submit. Like if it's due at midnight, don't do it at 11:30 at night. Give yourself a day or two always, after you've gotten all the materials together, which really a week or two in advance is a really good idea. But like try and get as many things done so that when there's an inevitable small snafu, it does not become a mega snafu. And it's always stressful. Like it's stressful. It's not fun. Michael, you look like you want to say something.
Just on this point, I doubt it's changed. I applied, 8 years ago, but when I was applying, I remember there were like I applied to 15 different schools, and there were like the software that the schools use is really clunky, and it takes a lot of time to like click through, and then like you'd like lose progress, and then it wouldn't have like saved your, and it like needs your entire CV, and like needs like your entire education, and like it takes a lot of time to fill out the stuff before you upload the files. So that's another reason why you don't want to be starting the application at 11 p.m. the night before it's due. Or an hour before the deadline or whatever. At least start the application early, and then figure out, like, get through all the kind of basic stuff and figure out where you have to upload the file.
Very, very sound advice. If you are fortunate enough to get accepted, go visit. The visits are really, really important for a couple of reasons. You can meet other faculty. Great. You can meet all the faculty. You can go to a talk. The really important thing is like, go talk to the other graduate students. Like, I can't say like, yes, you need to go for the intellectual rigor and everything, but you want to know that you're going to want to have, I mean, this like, you're going to have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or beers with those other graduate students, because they are going to be your cohort. They're going to be your friends. And it's really important to think about the way that the students are supported and what their lives look like, because that is going to be your life. And as I say this, like two of my closest friends in the world are from grad school, and we are still in touch. I saw one this summer. I'm talking to the other one on Friday. We talk about our work. We talk about our kids. We talk about all these things, but it has been formative because we were doing similar work and had similar interests, and it made such difference. So I think that's really important to think about. And I mean, Talya and Michael, I think you can, opine on this as well, if you want. Otherwise, you don't have to.
Yeah, I would say for me, something that's really important was gender balance. Like philosophy is very male dominated. And so when I went to the University of South Florida, like I got to talk to the only other like non-man there. And it was kind of awkward. It was across the classroom. And I was like, what's the gender situation like here? And that person was like, it's terrible. Don't come here. And then I was like, okay, I probably shouldn't come here. And then when I came to CUNY, like CUNY does it finds it really important to have like a good gender balance in the philosophy department and prioritizes that. And I was like, wow, I've never been around so many women philosophers. This is awesome. And I think like I would be a lot less happy in a department where I felt like the department didn't care about gender or race or these things that I think are important to change in academia. So
I mean, I think, Talya, do you want to chime in, or are you good?
Yeah, I think all of that's true. And also just like, we'll talk about how long the programs take, but you're in the programs for a long time. And other people in your life will sort of like do different things during that period of time. And so it's really nice to have people who are with you every step of the way, and understand the sort of unique thing that you're doing. And so, yeah, making sure that it's people that like you respect and are interested in, and that they seem happy is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think this point about life choices is really important to think about through this whole one. Because, and then we'll talk more about the time and period, but like by doing the PhD, you are choosing not to do other things. Provided you are comfortable with that decision, that can be amazing and the right decision. But it's worth thinking about what other lives exist. It's kind of like the Midnight Library, where she picks all the different books and all the lives she could have had, except she's in the life that she has. Anyway, I don't know if you've read that book. Okay, moving on. If you are fortunate enough to have an offer or two, these are some things to consider. The first one, funding. If they do not fund you, do not go. I repeat, if they do not fund you, do not go. This is like, this is a critical thing to consider. You cannot have debt from doing a PhD, because Talya and Michael will tell you about the average times a degree in the humanities and social sciences in the US, which will, and I can do that too, but it's really important to be funded. And if, for example, the department has some funding or has funding, can fund 3 students, and you can't, and you're student number 4 and you don't get funding, but they're like, we love you anyway, why don't you come? Like, that means that they don't love you as much as the other 3. And like, that's a harsh thing to say, but you really need to be properly funded to do this.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I think some people don't know that like if you get multiple offers, you can also play them against each other, and you can say like, well, I actually got this amount of money from like this other university. Can you guys offer me any more money? I'd really love to be in New York, but that's just I can't make it on that salary. Often they can find the money, they just haven't like asked the provost or whatever. If they really want you, then they probably can find a little extra money for you. Like one of my offers, it was like 14K a year or something. And then I was like, actually, I'm considering a different university. And they were like, oh, well, here's like a little bit more money, like another 2,000 a year, just because I told them I was considering another place. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's important. And then, we've talked about some of the other things that are related here, like climate and intellectual fit. One thing that's really important, if you go for one famous person, said famous person may depart. Because said famous person, may get stolen by another university or something like that. So you need to, exactly what the slide says, hedge your bets. Make sure you have a department that has enough people who you can do your work with. And that you have it has an intellectual environment that will support you, because you're also going to need to build a committee. And that committee is made up of members from your department, from your discipline. And so you need to have at least 1 or 2 people who you think you could work with and do really good work. Because if you don't have that, then you run the risk of not being well supported and having a problem if your advisor leaves. Because sometimes what happens is the students go with the advisor, and sometimes they don't. And sometimes people don't want to go to another university. They can't go to another university for certain reasons like that, or they'd have to restart their whole PhD at said second university. So you have to think about this question too. And I would just always say, talk to the grad students. May I go to the next slide, or Michael, do you look like you want to say something?
I have one more thought, and that's I wish I had realized like the difference in funding between private and public universities when I was considering PhDs, because like I love CUNY, but we don't have that much extracurricular funding. So we only have like $300 for travel to conferences per year. But I know that other universities, private universities, have a lot more money to like help with those sorts of things. And that can really help you get a job in the end, like the more kind of extracurriculars of the PhD, and also 6th and 7th year funding. Some universities, often private universities, it's very easy to get 6th and 7th year funding, but at the GC, it's a lot harder to get 6th and 7th year funding.
Which I should also make a point, which goes to why you should or shouldn't do a PhD. You will possibly be in graduate school for 7 years, if not more. The average time to degree for a PhD in the humanities is somewhere between 7 and 10 years. So you are making a very long-term life commitment. So whether or not, if you want to do that, we want you to have your eyes open to understand what a what a PhD looks like in the United States. So reasons you should do a PhD. You have a passion for your field. You are patient and diligent. You love to write. You will probably write a dissertation. Even if you did a partially digital dissertation, you will still need to write a dissertation. You're going to spend lots of time writing. So if you don't really enjoy writing, you might enjoy really loving doing research, but if you don't want to write basically the equivalent of a book, then, take that into consideration. You got to be self-motivated. Everybody hustles. Everybody's got a side hustle. Everybody's got the stuff they do, the other stuff they do. You have to be comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty. And these last ones are financial questions because, these are things that we think are important for people to know. You don't have a lot of debt from undergrad because even if you have a stipend, it's not a lot of money. And that you have few current obligations and that you're comfortable with living lean. Maybe not buying a house, maybe waiting to buy a house, things like that. You also may not want to buy a house because where you do your PhD is probably not where you're going to get a job. And that's always a thing to think about. If people are like, I only want to live in New York, well, that's great. And you can do that, but it's unlikely you will be able to do your PhD in New York and stay in New York and be a professor. It works out sometimes, it doesn't always work out that way. And so it's a thing to realize, like, if there are certain things that you really value in your life, and those things would, have to change as a result of a PhD, it's just something to think about. Okay, reasons you should not do a PhD. You're not really sure why you're doing it, just because, like to Talya's point, just because you're good at chemistry doesn't mean you should go get a PhD in chemistry. I think Talya also said something in our session the other day, because Talya was also a dancer. And the dance professor said, if you can't imagine doing anything other than dance, then you should be a dancer. But if you can imagine doing other things, you should think about those things. And so I think it's just being very open-minded to what this means. So, if you are open to a wide range of career options, or you've always wanted to live abroad in one country, there are many different ways to do that. So think about all of the different things that could possibly happen, and think about it. But if you're not really sure why you're doing it, if you're doing it just because, well, you don't know what else to do and you kind of don't want to leave and go into that big bad world, those are probably not the best reasons to do it. Okay, so a couple of things. Yes. I don't know. Do you guys want to start first on some of these questions? Because, reflecting as you guys are moving towards trying to finish, and you guys have different career goals, I would say, with your PhDs, which is worth chatting about too. I don't know if either of you want to go in first or.
Yeah, Michael, do you want to go first? I feel like you're doing a more like quote traditional thing.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm applying for academic jobs now. Like, if you think that applying to PhDs is competitive, applying for academic jobs is even more competitive, right? For like every job, there's like hundreds of people applying for the same thing, and they all are like just as qualified as I am, if not more. So that's pretty scary. I'm applying, like right now I have like 60 jobs on my like roster of things I'm applying to, and they're all over the world, right? Like they're not in the Northeast. And so like one of the things that I've committed to in trying to get an academic job is like not living in the place where all my friends are right now, not living in the same place as my family, probably getting a postdoc, if I get anything, a postdoc for 1 year, and then having to go on the job market again, get another postdoc, and then maybe get a tenure track job. Probably not, but gonna be, I mean, I don't have any savings and I'm 30, right? I don't have like I want to have kids at some point, but I don't have enough money to like think about that as a feasible thing. So like I think there are a lot of sacrifices that I've had to like negotiate and I'm okay with, but I'm not sure if I really thought about them when I was 24, when I was starting a PhD program. But at the same time, I've had like the most amazing experiences as being able to live in New York and learning all that I've learned and becoming the person I've become and having all the friends I do have. Like I wouldn't give it back. But like I definitely have given up some things. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that you never know what your advising experiences will be like, or like how supportive the professors will be going into a new department. And it could be the case that you get an advisor who is not supportive and who's really mean to you, and that you have to deal with that. Like not all universities are exactly the same. And And I know a lot of people across many universities who've had horrible experiences in their PhDs, just because their advisors have been like not supportive. So that is something that can happen, and it's pretty common.
I feel like everything we're saying is scaring you all away from doing a PhD. You are also talking to two people who have been in their programs for a long time and are on the cusp of change and having a lot of fears and anxieties about that. So just to sort of give context to where we're at, in year 3, I would have said very different things. And I think it's useful to hear what we have to say now, but also just keep in mind that like we're at a very anxiety inducing stage of our lives where we've put a lot of time and work into this, and now we're facing a scary thing of finding jobs. I initially came in thinking that I wanted to go into academia specifically because I really like teaching. And one thing that I didn't know is that academia is not very much about teaching. And actually, like, the sort of more prestigious you are, the less you have to teach. So if teaching is something you want to do, like you can adjunct with a master's degree. There are other ways to do that. And so what I realized is that academia is actually not, despite really enjoying teaching, academia is not where I think that I can use my skills best. And I don't think that it is an environment that will, in a sort of long-term way, be a happy space for me. And so I'm really interested in going into policy work and doing research that will hopefully have some impact on universal childcare is the thing that I'm really excited about. And I work with some nonprofits in the city now. And so I'm sort of, so my process and my timeline is different, right? If you're going on the academic job market, it only happens once a year. Whereas for me, I'm going to be, I don't have a, there's no fall semester start date. I'm leaving the world of semesters, which is wild. I've lived in that world for a very long time. And yeah, so I think the other thing is that people in academia are very knowledgeable about academia and very good at guiding you on next steps of continuing in academia. And some professors are not excited. Some advisors are not excited about their students leaving academia. I'm super fortunate. I really love my advisor and she's been wonderfully supportive. But it's not the most popular choice with everyone. And so if you're not sure that you want to go into academia, definitely make sure you have an advisor who is open to that. And then also you might have to do a little more legwork of making connections outside of universities, because that is something that your professors will not necessarily be experts at.
I think that's a very accurate assessment in both cases and what you both said. But obviously we all decided to go get PhDs. So we did drink the Kool-Aid at one point or another. So I think the thing we'd all say is like, think and pause and reflect about the process as you go through it, making sure it's the right process for you and for what you want to achieve with it. So I'm going to show you a couple slides on resources and then we're going to take some questions. Sorry about that. We have resources here. Chronicle of Higher Education is awesome. It's super useful. They have a lot of stuff about graduate education, what it looks like, as well as some of these other resources that we have. And I think the other thing to say, like, as you are preparing your materials, you should talk to the Office of Career Planning and Professional Development. If you do not, that's one thing that's very useful. Apparently I have this slide in twice. I'm not really sure why, but most importantly, I was gonna say the Writing Center is really a resource that you want to have and want to use, because they do writing consultations for revisions of writing samples, and they also do workshops on personal statements for PhDs. And so for PhD applications. So they're a really great resource to use. You got a lot of smart people there whose goal is to help you write better and more persuasively. So I think with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if we have some questions. Okay, so there are two ways if people have questions. You can either put questions into the chat. Hang on one sec. Let me just quit this here. You can put questions in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hands. Both of those are fine. Anyone? I'm feeling a little blind. I can't see if anyone has questions. Talia or Michael, am I losing my mind, or I'm not seeing any questions?
No questions that I can see.
Okay. We hope we haven't scared you too much. That was not necessarily our intention. Do we have PhDs on programs abroad, the UK, Europe, and Canada? I can speak to my experience in the United Kingdom, which is slightly dated because it was a while ago. But the UK, Canada, I think, has PhDs that are more similar to us. But Europe, it's a whole different thing. And I really am not able to give you too much advice about that. But Michael and I can talk to the UK. Most PhDs in the UK, at least in my field, are research-based. You might do a master's degree beforehand, but you are writing a dissertation that is it usually is 3 to 4 years that you are writing a dissertation in the United Kingdom. It is basically an entirely research-focused degree. And the funding is also very particular to whether or not you are, I would say now UK, the Arts and Humanities Research Council is what will fund certain British nationals. They used to also sponsor Europeans, but they left. And so it's a very different type of experience. It's a shorter period of work that you are working, but you are working very intensively. So you really, in that case, need to have a much more defined topic. Now there are times at my old university where there are 2 supervisors, but you used to have 1 supervisor. And so it's a very different thing. There are certain very interesting flexible programs like the Open University, which is super cool. But also, again, a lot of the basic things apply, like certain universities are very strong for certain things, not for other things. And you kind of need to know a little bit about that going in. Overseas students in the UK generally have a difficult time getting funding unless there's funding from their host country. So for example, the Greeks, there were always I'm an archaeologist. There were always a lot of Greeks that were all funded because the Greeks want to fund Greeks to study archaeology. And so that was one thing that would happen quite a lot. And there are some overseas scholarships. They have these overseas research fellowships, which used to fund people who didn't have British passports. There are also, of course, certain very prestigious fellowships, but those are usually very much geared, and you're tracked like Gates or Rhodes or Marshall. You have to apply in a very particular way for those. And there are certain age limits, I think. Lauren, do you have sorry, not Lauren. I'm sorry, Michael. I saw that name. Lauren is below you. Do you have any additional comments along those lines?
I have some thoughts. I think it depends what you're doing the PhD for, but if you're hoping to do a PhD in the humanities and hoping to get a job in academia, I was warned against doing my PhD in the UK, except for, like Oxbridge, I think you went to Oxford, right, Lizzie? So Oxbridge and St. Andrews are probably exceptions to that, but if you're doing your PhD anywhere else that isn't as prestigious as that, I was warned against it because it's shorter. So you're basically in the US program, you're doing another master's degree. You're doing a CUNY, you do 60 credits worth of coursework. And then you do a whole dissertation. So we get an extra MPhil. And then you have I'm going to have 7 years of basically teaching experience. So when I go on the job market, I'm super competitive, right? Because I've taken all these classes, I've got lots of papers, I've done lots of teaching. But someone from the UK, from the University of Sheffield, who's on their PhD and has only got 3 years worth of research, they're going to be a little less competitive on the job market. But that might be field specific. So you should for sure talk to people in the field that you're trying to go into and ask them what they think about you doing a PhD in the UK or Europe with a shorter, just research one VS, the longer American one.
I think that's very sound advice. And also it is very field specific, like what I do. Oxford exports people in classical and ancient studies. It's very strong for it. It's very good for it. And you don't have that much trouble transferring that type of degree back to the United States because there are such large networks. So that's a very exceptional case. I think the point is there were people though who I met in graduate school who were like, this is great. I'm here for 3 years. I can do this and then I can go do something else. And so there was a shorter commitment in that sense for certain people, which was appealing. But I think it's hard because also coming back, if you all, depending also on how the teaching works at that university, that can be very hard. So I taught at Royal Holloway after, so I had done tutorials and I had taught in, I had done lectures as well. So people knew I could teach normal classes, where I had other colleagues who'd been other like friends who'd done their PhDs at Oxford who specifically had to go find additional teaching experience to be a viable candidate in the US job market, because they're like, you've done 2 tutorials, like you've taught some tutorials, and are you really going to come to like Ohio and teach? Well, okay, so there's that piece. So I think it's, again, really doing a lot of research and understanding the parameters. And there are pluses and minuses to both systems, but you need to know kind of what those systems look like. I see one comment in the chat, which is any advice to older students who are applying to PhDs later in life. I think, I think there are certain institutions that are super open to students of all ages. The Graduate Center is one of them. We have had a number of students of wide ranges of ages, backgrounds, et cetera, who have gone on to doctoral study at CUNY. I would say other institutions might not be as open to it, because if the idea is they're going to shape the field, you want to have younger people to shape the field. That said, my own advisor, well, my second advisor in graduate school, my first one almost died halfway through. Things that happen. Well, he had an appendicitis. Came through it okay, but not good. But my second supervisor, she had a whole career as like a civil servant who was a civic engineer in Australia before she went back to graduate school. And that actually really helped her to do the type of work she was doing. And because she had that background, it was advantageous. So I think certain schools go like, oh, you have really interesting life experience that's related to what you want to study. We like that. But I think it's department specific. But I think I've seen a number of students who are not in their 20s successfully apply to doctoral programs coming out of, the master's programs at the Graduate Center.
I'll add one thing that can be helpful is to almost every program has a website with their current students, and you can take a look and see. And that goes for everything, right? Like if you want to make sure there's a gender balance or a race balance or age balance, you can look at the current students, and that will give you a sense of the kinds of cohorts that they're taking. And then I think really it's like the question is, why you? What do you bring to the table? And I think that having more work experience is can be a very positive thing. So I think as long as you're like going to an institution that is cool and sort of aware of inclusion across all like axes of identity, I think it's great to have had other experiences that you can bring. And I will say it wasn't a super long time between, I think it was 5 or 6 years between undergrad when I applied to the chemistry program, and then when I applied to the sociology program, and I just had 6-ish years of work experience, and I had a lot. I was more interesting as a person, and I was more grounded as a person, and brought more to the table. So that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah. I think that's very solid advice. And yeah, there is no one ideal candidate. There are many different people, and departments are often looking to build an interesting cohort. They don't want to take all of the same students, because that doesn't actually, it doesn't create a super interesting intellectual environment. But if you're trying to shape the field moving forward, you need a diversity of views that complement the strengths in your department. Yeah.
And I do have peers in my program that are in their 40s and 50s and 60s. So that's a real thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in some ways being like not being 24 is a good thing. Like 24-year-olds can be really irresponsible. They can like, stay out drinking all night with their like cohort mates, or like not turn in their essays. Maybe they don't understand how to like work in the library or whatever. I think you know, in my department, the people who actually are not super young often get through the PhD a little quicker than the people who are quite young, because they like, I don't know, have a really good work ethic and know what it's like to like just work slowly, chip away something very like slowly and schematically over time and finish it in good time.
Yeah. Well, we hope that you have found this evening useful and edifying. I am recording it, so if you want to see it later, or if you know someone who is unable to attend, we'll be happy to share that with them later. But you know, good luck to all of you during the application process. Yes, go use the Writing Center. Say hi if you're one of our students, and we wish you the best in this process. Okay. With that, everyone have a lovely evening. Good night.